Hey everyone, welcome to the channel, and at the risk of sort of stirring the pot or stirring the hornet's nest, what I want to do today is talk a little bit about what I would consider to be the big problem with new atheism. And by that I mean the problem with atheism as an identity, not necessarily atheism as a philosophical position. I actually don't really have a problem with atheism as a philosophical position, especially for the atheists that are willing to accept what I would consider to be the implications of atheism, like moral nihilism, these sorts of things. Instead, my focus of this video is on the problem with new atheism as an identity and their approach to scholarship. So getting right into it, the main issue is that new atheism itself is not based on careful scholarship or rational argumentation, but rather contempt and ridicule. And I'll talk a little bit more about why this isn't just a claim that I'm making, but why this is actually supported by the very people who started this movement. And to kind of make this point, what other new arguments have the new atheists made? And these people, the four horsemen of new atheism, like Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, and Daniel Dennett. But what points have they made that other atheists haven't made better or more charitably? And this includes atheists like J.L. Mackie, Anthony Flew, although later he converted back, I guess, to theism/deism, Kai Nielsen, Graham Oppie. These are, really sophisticated, academic, serious atheists. And the question is, what new argument have the new atheists made? And I think the thing is new atheism, as we start to understand the sort of historical context around this, it's based more on a shared aversion to religion rather than arguments in favor of atheism or denying the truth of any specific religious doctrine. And particularly as a movement that came about in the early to mid 2000s as a result of the 9/11 attacks. So that's why there's this cultural attack on religion, because religion was seen as causing a lot of these evils in society, like terrorism, also things like, child abuse. There were a lot of scandals, and teaching of science. This new atheism is this movement that's this activism to try to get rid of religion. They think religion is harmful. They think it's bad. And that's why they're against theism or against religion, as opposed to necessarily making any particular argument, some new argument that's been made. I think we can see this as a parallel, this sort of parallel of the sort of religious fundamentalists on one hand and the militant atheists as kind of a reaction to that on the other hand. And this isn't a problem that I'm just seeing. This is a problem that many scholarly atheists like Michael Ruse, Tim O'Neill, Thomas Nagel also see as a problem. And I'd say if you haven't heard of these people, like if you've heard of Dawkins, Hitchens, Harris, and Dennett, but you haven't heard of Michael Ruse, Thomas Nagel, J.L. Mackie, maybe you're part of the problem. Maybe you're not educating yourself enough about your position. Now, here's the problem. From Dawkins himself, he basically says, Michael Shermer, Michael Ruse, Eugene Scott, and others are probably right that contemptuous ridicule is not an expedient way to change the minds of those who are deeply religious. But I think we should probably abandon the irredeemably religious precisely because that is what they are, irredeemable. I am more interested in the fence-sitters who haven't really considered the question very long or very carefully, and I think they are likely to be swayed by a display of naked contempt. Nobody likes to be laughed at. Nobody wants to be the butt of contempt. Now, I agree with Dawkins. I think he's right that he will get a lot of fence-sitters to his position. But the question is, number one, this is not how scholarly debates are resolved. This is not how one handles these conversations with serious people. And two, why would you want these fence-sitters, not necessarily the best or the brightest people, to be sort of representing your ideological position? I think this is... to me, it's very surprising, and it doesn't seem very strategic, but I do think Dawkins is right that it is effective. It's effective even if in the long run it's not maybe the smartest move, so to speak. And, here's Michael Ruse. Here's his response. He's an atheist philosopher of science and someone I've corresponded with a little bit. He basically says new atheists do science a quote-unquote grave disservice and a disservice to scholarship. He said Dawkins in The God Delusion would fail any introductory philosophy or religion course, and that reading it made him ashamed to be an atheist. And he basically said, I'm proud to be the focus of the invective of the new atheists. They're a bloody disaster. So Michael Ruse, he had previously testified to the Supreme Court in favor of teaching evolution in schools as opposed to intelligent design or creation movements. And recently, I guess the last decade or so, he's shifted his focus from, rather than arguing, I guess, for these sorts of things, he's literally fighting against the new atheists and not very happy with them. He's not really one to mince his words, as you can see here. But I think to a certain point, he's right in the sense that this attitude of contempt and ridicule, that's logically invalid. that's just basically an argument from incredulity. Oh, how could you believe that? You must be an idiot. Rather than actually responding to these arguments or doing this. Now, you can maybe make an argument, well, maybe that's what you have to do for atheism, because atheism doesn't really provide any positive beliefs. It's just a rejection of belief. So I guess all you can do is just say, oh, I'm not convinced. Or if you're really, I guess, one of the new atheist types, oh, like, how could you believe that? But when you start to realize this, and you realize this isn't the way academics resolve these disputes, it seems odd to align your movement with these sorts of ideas. Now, part of the problem is, or what this does to people like myself, is it causes reverse polarization. So I begin to think atheists do not have any good arguments to offer, and even worse, that they can't engage in rational debate. And I actually have to really try hard to remember, when I see a lot of this trash online, to say this is not what all atheists think. I still have friends who are atheists, which really helps, and just be like, okay, this is really scraping the bottom of the barrel here. Otherwise, what's going to happen is I'm going to start to think, why would I assume, or why would anyone assume atheism is a rational response to evidence if atheists do not or cannot demonstrate that they hold themselves to a higher standard of scholarship? Because I think you could make the case that, okay, they're just doing exactly what the Christian fundamentalists or what the religious fundamentalists are doing, who are also using these other sorts of tactics, which is fine. But if you're claiming you're representing science or reason or philosophy, you have to do better. And what I see is not doing better, I guess is the thing. And then I start to think, as a Christian who really does value philosophy, man, these atheists, they don't have anything to offer here. How can I respect atheism as a position if this position is literally founded on ideas of bad logic, of invalid arguments? So, and obviously it's more nuanced than that. It's really more nuanced than that. But that's kind of the question that it causes me to ask. And I certainly wouldn't want an educated agnostic or atheist to form their views about the merits of Christianity from the loudest or most competent voices on social media. And yet, unfortunately, this is what happens. This is what happens to atheists, and this is what happens to religious people. They kind of see the worst side of each other on social media and all these places, and they start forming their opinions, and then they're not really engaging with the best arguments on both sides, and it just kind of devolves to a certain extent. And part of the problem here is, I'd argue, there are significant and good challenges to Christianity and theism that should be and are discussed. It's just these are discussed in academic journals. They're not discussed on social media. You're not really moving beyond this sort of surface level, just kind of mudslinging, unfortunately. And one of the ways to notice this is notice how a lot of these objections to religion that the new atheists make, they're more moral. They're not based on whether or not religious belief is true. You could say, okay, well, religion causes this or does this, which maybe you can make an argument for that, although I don't think it's that nuanced. I think you have to be really careful. But if you do make that argument, that doesn't necessarily reflect on the truth or falsity of religion, at least not initially per se. You would have to make more arguments to go from there to claim that this somehow invalidates religion as true. And, St. Augustine was aware of this problem. He's, almost 2,000 years ago, it's basically saying, I'm not going to read the whole quote, but look at this. When Christians talk nonsense about subjects that other people know by their own experience, it makes us look like idiots. And likewise, I would expect, and this is why I respect people like Michael RUSE who are looking at atheists and they're saying, yeah, the same sort of thing is going on. People are looking at atheism as a position, and they're seeing it as just this position of ridicule and contempt and not able to make any rational argumentation, and as a result, it just looks like that's all they have to offer, as opposed to an actual worldview or something intellectually satisfying to people. So anyway, I don't want to read the whole thing, but great quote. And then we move on to New Atheist Identity, and this is where Michael RUSE had sent me a couple resources on this. One of the books is Hannah Scheidt's Practicing Atheism, Cultural, Media, and Ritual in Contemporary Atheist Network. This is one of those academic books. It's really expensive because it's kind of a niche thing, but it's a great book. And basically what Hannah Scheidt does is she goes through and just kind of analyzes, how is atheism represented in culture? How is atheist culture? What does it look like? How can we describe it? And basically what she makes the argument is, in media, atheists are portrayed as smart, but also misanthropic and socially awkward. Some of the people like Dr. House, the serial killer Dexter Morgan. I actually love the show Dexter. Sheldon Cooper, I think from The Big Bang Theory. And when Michael RUSE and I were talking, he's like, I don't necessarily disagree with these stereotypes either, given that I've met enough of these people. But it's interesting. This is how they're portrayed in media, which you could argue kind of creates this sort of thing. And she kind of makes this claim, and I don't know if I'd make this claim, but she makes this claim that most of contemporary atheism centers around bigoted white male figures that are well established in society and education. And she thinks this is problematic because they're bigoted and they don't know much about things like Islam per se. They don't know much about Islam. And here's a quote from Richard Dawkins: "Dear Muslima, stop whining, will you?" Yes, I know. I'm not even going to read it. But the point that people make is, hey, this quote is way worse than anything I've read from the religious fundamentalists, which are, pretty bad. Now I have respect for Dr. Dawkins, but of course this quote, not the best look. And obviously if this was said against something like Jews or blacks or something like that, it would just be so morally reprehensible. But somehow when it's targeted at Islam, it's okay. Or when it's targeted at Christianity, it's okay. And I find that deeply, deeply problematic. And that's, I think, the problem, that atheist identity is caught up in this sort of proving that you're right or that you're smarter in this very bigoted way. And it attracts people who often aren't very well versed in science or philosophy. And it gives them a way to feel superior to other people. It gives them a sort of scapegoat or somebody to look down on that they can blame their problems on, when in reality, the situation is much more nuanced. So what's the future? Well, I do think the new atheists provide valuable criticism of some aspects of organized religion, and that some of their criticisms are very, very, very valid, and that they should be taken very seriously. And if we can get beyond the mudslinging and say, okay, what's the issue, or what's the argument that this person's making? And is there a way that there's actually some truth to this, or there's some good point, even if I don't like the way they're saying it, I don't like the content of their argument, I think they're being an asshole, these sorts of things. If I can move beyond that, is there some aspect of their criticism that has a kernel of truth to it, or has some enough truth to it that is worth me stopping and thinking, maybe there's a good point to that. Can we kind of pick that apart? Obviously, God is not going away. Christianity is not going away, especially for people like myself who have come to Christianity and really see a lot of value in it and aren't really willing to accept things like maybe moral nihilism, these sorts of things. Obviously, these things aren't going to go away. And because the movement of New Atheism is mostly dead in terms of book sales and things, a lot of the negative aspects of its identity still remain, and they still remain online and on social media. But I think the way forward is that atheists, or people who are new atheists, who kind of have this moral element to it, should work with those who are religious to make the world a better place, rather than painting with too broad a brush. And the reason I say this, right, is if an atheist comes up to me and says, hey, Paul, I think Christian culture has a problem with how it treats members of the LGBTQ community, gay members, transgender members, I would agree with them. I would agree, and I would say, yes, I think these are problems, and I don't think these are problems that have an easy solution either, but I would agree with them. But if they come to me and they say, Paul, religion's evil, we got to get rid of it, how could you be religious? And they're just contemptuous and ridiculing me, it's like, okay, like, now you're like personally attacking me, and now I'm like here with all my other religious people, and we're going to be, rather than working together to like fight this other aspect, I'm going to say, no, you're wrong about this, and we're just going to start talking about this. And I think I find that the issues that people have, or these sorts of claims that the new atheists or these anti-theist types make against religion, that becomes my area and issue of concern that I am focusing on and I'm writing about, as opposed to other issues that also need to be solved, right? So I'm focusing my energy and my attention to sort of warding off these other sorts of attacks, rather than actually working on other things that I think maybe to some may be more important. And I have to make that judgment call, right? But that's kind of the reality of what happens. And really the question is, would you be willing to work with others you disagree with? And this is both Christians and both atheists, if it meant making progress towards your goals. It's a tough question. But really, I think the way going forward is to try to move away from this sort of this Manichaeism, this good versus evil, I'm right, I'm self-righteous, and these other guys, they're wrong, they're evil, all those sorts of things, and start focusing on just listening and just being more nuanced and saying, okay, maybe it's true that the new atheists aren't able to, are kind of jerks in a lot of cases, and that this identity is here. But maybe at the same time, not but and they still make some good points about religion that we can incorporate and we can do better, right? We can still get better. That's an interesting question. So anyway, thanks for watching. I hope this sort of at least got you thinking, and at least, I don't know, hopefully added some nuance here, and realize that it's not this atheist versus science versus Christian versus science. It's not that simple. There's way more nuance. There are people on all sides of the debate that are really trying to do the best they can, and I guess that's just the reality of it. So anyway, let me know what you think. Do you have any thoughts? You can go ahead and put them in the comments. I'll do my best to try to reply. If you come across attacking any of the stuff in this sort of new atheist way, I'll probably just ignore you because I don't think that's worth my time. But other than that, if you make a good point, I'll try to engage. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.